Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome. Welcome to this Tuesday's artist live stream chat. We've got someone I'm really excited to introduce to you. Before we get to that, I'd like to say Happy International Non-Binary People's Day to everyone who's watching or listening wherever you might be. It's a good day. It's a good day. Yes, today. Oh, hello, everyone. Oh, it's so great to see you folks here. Thank you so much for joining. Today, again, I'm super excited to be introducing, well, maybe not introducing to some of you, but our guest today is Emily Bruusgaard, who is a teacher at Trent University, an activist, a writer, a maker of many different things, a creator of community, one of, like, transparency here, one of the LivingRoom Community Art Studio's board members. We are so very lucky to have Emily as a part of our team, and just an all-around awesome human being. And if you've ever had Emily as a teacher, you know this already. If you know Emily as a friend or a colleague, you know all this already. But today, I thought, why not? Let's take a look at education as artistry, activism as artistry, and dialogue as artistry. So without further ado, I'm just going to bring Emily in here. Let's see if I can do this. So there's Emily. Let's see. Oh, come on. Come on. I'm going to wave at you, Emily. Emily, do you want to send me an invite? Or an ask to join the live stream? Look how professional we are, folks. We've only been doing this 3 months. You'd think I'd get it by now. Let's see. Yeah, so Emily, if you can send me ask to join the conversation, I will. Oh, there we go. There we go. Let's go live, Emily. Waiting. It's that magic.
It's really funny. I had this on my phone. I'm on my phone right now. I had my computer set up to do this at my computer, and it's like, and I feel technologically challenged today. It's okay. I can stay on my phone. It's probably better anyway. I just might move around, because anybody who knows me, who's had me in a class, knows that when I get excited, you know this, right? My hands start going like this. So that's when my phone might start waving around.
But during you like have
so sorry, I'm just gonna turn you up. You cut out there.
Oh, okay. In board having knit, so as you can be knitting away.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's a funny thing we talked about this. You and I have had lots of video chats through this process of COVID, because we haven't been able to see each other in person. And one of the things we talked about, you and I, was about craft and the ability of craft to calm the mind. But ironically, when you calm the mind, it actually opens your ears and you really hear people. And I think anybody who does a craft seriously knows this too, that not only do you hear people, you hear the undercurrents of a conversation. So I find my retention is better when I'm knitting. I feel the undercurrents in the room, so I can tell when people are stressed. It's like knitting keeps my hands busy, and so my eyes and my ears and all my spidey senses are tingling. Yeah. You and I talked about the Miss Marple stories, right? Because you and I both share this love of detective fiction, and that's Miss Marple's gift. Is what people don't realize is that you can knit while not really looking at it. If you're just doing a basic stocking stitch, you don't have to look at it. So you can have your knitting and you can be sitting still. People forget you're in the room, and then they start speaking really freely. That's how Miss Marple traffics in information, right? She knits as she's as she's listening to the gossip. She retains all that information. She hears things, right? All her little senses are going. Yeah, interesting.
Well, all of that. Is your laptop?
Yeah, my laptop's open. I might be better on that because you're cutting out on me in my feed. So should we try my laptop? Shall I switch over?
I don't know if it can be done. I think it can be done. But is there feedback?
It might be feedback. Here, I'll just turn it off. There we go. Turned it off.
Let's see. Oh no,
Is it any better?
that's okay. Hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's just cutting out a little bit. That's all. So
Okay.
I'm sorry. I apologize to anybody who's listening that I might be cutting out a little bit too. I don't know.
You're good.
Okay.
Um, but before we jump in, else, you yourself to any.
Do you want me to introduce myself? Okay. So my name is Emily Bruusgaard. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. It's a little bit in flux right now. I have come to, since it's non-binary People's Day, I've come to gender fluidity quite late in life. It's been an interesting exploration, and it's one of the things about teaching that we don't often talk about, is that teaching gives you things that you're a fellow learner when you are in the classroom, whether you realize it or not. You're taking in things, and the students that I've had have been so open and so giving when it comes to things talking about gender and sexuality, that for me, who, you know, I was in my 20s in the late 80s, early 90s, and we didn't have those conversations. You were lesbian or you were gay, you were boy, you were girl, and there were these pressures to conform. We didn't have that kind of the language of all the nuances of gender. So I always had difficulty with that, and I've just come into recognizing that I think I've always been you and I have talked about this too, but I've always been gender fluid and just never had the language to name it. So I'm still ruminating. And I think there's a thing too, when you hit middle age and your hormones change, your relationship with your gender and your sexuality changes over a lifetime as well. So I have been married to my husband for 26 years. And we have 2 grown sons. Our sons are 18 and 21. We're adoptive parents. I've been teaching at Trent. I was a mature student. I've been teaching at Trent now. This is my 4th year. So I'm like the poster child. I tell all my students this. I'm the poster child for, yes, you can totally screw up. You can flunk out of your first year of university. You can go party for 4 years and follow bands around. And I mean, it was the late 80s in Vancouver. The music was amazing. I went back to school when I was 27 and then had to do it with kids and with all kinds of other things. So it took me longer. And so I got my PhD in 2016 and went back to Trent where I'd done my master's, and I've been teaching there ever since. Yeah. So a little bit about me.
Amazing. Yes.
I'm sorry?
You're a writer as well.
I am. You know, you are so much more encouraging of my writing than I am of my own writing. I've been scribbling in notebooks since I was probably about 9 or 10. Always hidden them away, was embarrassed about my stories, and it was never considered very practical. So I never really kind of went anywhere with it, except, of course, my academic writing. I write on textiles and literature and the relationship with women's relationship with material culture, and trying to write. And I'm a poster child for that. You know, the scribbling, you know, you hide your writing on little Post-it notes and notebooks underneath. But you have encouraged me, and I am at work on my first novel. Yeah. So I don't have a contract. I don't have an agent. I don't have any of that. I'm just writing. And I'm trying to write. I'm a third culture kid, which means that I grew up outside of Canada. My dad was a Canadian diplomat. So I'm trying to write some of that experience. Those of you who are listening who might have military parents know what I'm talking about, is that constant moving around as a child. And you just kind of, I'm trying to feel my way through it. I've got 4 chapters written now, so let's see what happens.
Amazing. Hey,
That's I want everybody to hear that's all Mary, right? All of you who have Mary in your lives, you know that she encourages you in this artistic production, and you're my biggest cheerleader. So yeah.
here I'm practicing. I don't think that's entirely true,
It
but
is.
thank you.
You're
I'm
welcome.
practicing saying thank you. Um, but that's an interesting piece. All of those pieces are very interesting when you look at them together. There's something there that we talk about often, the relationship between creativity and empowerment and wanting to be visible and feeling the need to hide at the same time. I think that's something a lot of creative people, particularly folks who've experienced any kind of marginalization in their life, any kind of trauma,
Yeah.
we have that in us.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, what's that about, Emily?
Well, there's a few things going on there. I think you and I have talked as we've gone through this process together of talking, and full disclosure to everybody here, Mary and I have gone on this journey together of talking about anti-racism, and talking about Black Lives Matter, and talking about that. And one of the things that you and I have both come up against is this, coming from settlers, coming from colonizers, is kind of, we don't have a center. And when, I read books by Drew Hayden Taylor, Anishinaabe writers who I admire so much, who talk about the Wendigo, and talk about colonizers as the Wendigo, it's that emptiness at the center. Where is that kind of spirituality? And one of the things that our kind of generic white, but specifically WASP kind of Protestant culture tells us, is that arts aren't valuable, that it's not practical, dear. You should get a teaching degree. You should, well, art is lovely, acting is lovely, yes, theater is wonderful, but really you should have something practical to fall back on. And there's that sort of tamping down of our artistic process,
Yeah.
I think, a denial of it. I think there's a thing to do with being raised in kind of a gendered female way, that we put everybody else first, and the thing that we really need, that artistic expression, is the thing we put second.
Yeah.
I think that for those of us who feel a lot, feel empathetic, and really are doing that work again of anti-racism, you think, well, what can I possibly add to the conversation, right? I don't want to put another white voice out there. Like, what's the value in me talking about making up stories? Is just, and I think that that's wrong. Because I think the creative process is, and the artistic process is deeply spiritual. I think it connects us to community. I think it connects us to each other in a way. But you have to constantly work at this kind of like not feeling guilty or like unproductive in that capitalist way, that I'm not being productive if I'm sitting here writing in my notebook or writing on the laptop. I'm writing a story when I should be preparing lecture notes, or I should be putting out an article. I mean, there's so much pressure as an academic too. Like, I should be putting out an article. I should be putting out applications for a permanent job. I mean, I'm a sessional. I get paid by the course. So, I mean, that at 51, that's not really a sustainable career. So I should be doing more. Art always seems to end up the last thing on the list. Would you agree?
I think so. I think art, definitely looking at, the world that I was raised in, family, the culture, the kind of idea of what was valued, that
Yeah.
created not something. And I inherited that. My father is an artist, but
Yeah.
he's not allowed to be an artist. And I suspect that going back, I come from a long line of people who weren't able to do what they wanted to do, or weren't able to be themselves in any way. And they compromised that to be of service to other people, to be of service to other things.
Yeah.
And we learned that. We learned how to be to fill that gap, to fit that role, to do what people told us to do and without questioning.
Yeah.
But on the and of course, creativity is a part of that. The people see it as being nothing, and it's not. And in fact, not only that it's not a value, I think, but it's actually a signal. It's a sign of someone being lazy or self-centered or prideful. Not any of the things that I now recognize it to be. And I still have to fight that. I still have to dialogue with that voice that tells me that, making art is lazy, or that taking time to unpack my thoughts or to write my thoughts down or to document a story, anything like of that nature, is not selfish.
But don't you find too that your anxiety starts to go up, especially with COVID, right? I have panic attacks, so my anxiety goes up like this, and I start pacing. I start getting agitated. I'm angry with people, and of course, the one thing that I really need is the thing that I'm constantly tamping down, which is I need to write. It's like exercise. I need that mental stimulation. I have to write, or I get and I know there are other art forms like this too, but I have to write it down, even if it's just spilling it into a journal. Through one of the things that sustained me as an adoptive parent when there were so many challenges right at the beginning, and I should explain to people who don't know us that Henrik and I, my husband and I, became adoptive parents when our sons were 12 and 9. They were in foster care, and so that adopting older children is its own challenge, and its own creative challenge. I mean, that's another kind of creative process. Creative parenting, adoptive parenting is sort of like birth parenting, but sort of not. You use some of the same tools, and then some of them you have to throw out because they don't work. You've got kids who have trauma, who have lost family, right? And you're artificially trying to create this family. And my journals got me through that. I have 6 or 7 full journals from those years. Those first kind of 6 years, I was trying to finish I do everything the hard way. I was trying to finish a PhD. I was a newly adopted parent, not just 1, but 2 sons. And I mean, I don't know how I survived, but literally those journals kept me going. And so through COVID, at the times when I start to feel the panic rising again, I have to remind myself, I need to write. This is my body telling me I have to get this out on paper, or I'm going to keep circling. Yeah.
Creative self-expression as self-care, as a radical act of self-care, I think.
Yeah. Well, and you're reading Sonia Renee Taylor's The Body Is Not an Apology, right? Yeah. And have you got lots of little Post-it notes in there?
Yeah, I do. I'm like, there's so much that we can talk about today. But I was also conscious that I could probably just sit here and read this book aloud to people, and because, and I'll post about it. I posted about it this morning, but I'll post about it again on Facebook. Again, it's another reminder of the people who are really leading the way in breaking down systems of oppression, which is for, people of color, Indigenous people, First Peoples, Aboriginal peoples, the people who have never or rarely had the option not to fight. And I have to honor that, because I find so many of the people that I'm going to during this time when I'm, coping, the people that I reach for, the thoughts that inspire me, they're most frequently racialized peoples. And I have to really question my purpose and reaching for that. And I question like mythologizing and cultural appropriation, like all of these things within the creative world that we see happening so frequently. But where is this thought going? I'm not sure. Only that this book is such a lovely read. Yeah. It's easy to read. It's profound in its simplicity, like the elegance of how she conveys these ideas. There was one thought, one part. I'll read one part. May I?
You know what? I'm so glad you loved it.
Yeah. Well, I'm working my.
I go back to again and again and again.
Yeah. So I won't underline anything in this copy that I've borrowed from you then.
It's okay. The more I like it when people mark up books, because it, like, I have a couple of books that my dad had marked up, and you know, my dad rarely read a book more than once, and he was like me, a really prolific reader. But I have a couple of books that, you know, have his handwriting in them, and, you know, it's that visceral reminder of his presence, that we're carrying the same pages. I love having that. I'm one of those people, I dog ear, underline, highlight with books, especially books that I teach. I can't photocopy poems for students out of my own books, because especially poetry, I'm constantly writing notes. I should take a picture and I'll send it to you and you can post it. But I cannot post any of my own poetry books, because they're just like all full of marks and notes, comments and question marks, and oh, this is interesting. One of my favorite poems to give students in my first year class is Lucy Tapahonso's Leda and the Cowboy. And if you know the Greek myth of Leda and the Swan, Leda is assaulted by Zeus in disguise as a swan, and the Lucy Tapahonso is I believe she's Diné Navajo. Diné is the word I'm speaking badly. The word, the name that they use for themselves, and it follows Lucy, or it follows Leda meeting a cowboy, and he appears as the predator, but it uses the myth, the Greek myth of Leda and the Swan, and then transforms it into the Diné myth of Changing Woman. And so Changing Woman in the end of the story has the power. And so there's a whole lot in the poem about the appropriation of indigenous mythologies, but also the speaking back to colonizer mythologies, about, you know, underlying it is the missing and murdered indigenous women, but also matriarchal power, and coming back to the land. But I have to be honest, I typed up a whole new version of the poem, copying it from my original copy from like a version of the Norton Anthology of Poetry that is 15 years old and has so many marks all over the paper that there's no way anybody can even read the original poem anymore. So it's kind of...
I too see that as a beautiful thing. I love finding or like, it's like borrowing a book from the library and finding little notes or bookmarks that other people have left inside. You know, it's the power of that kind of creative engagement we have with one another, even if we don't meet one another. It's a passing along of knowledge, whether it's our own stories through creative self-expression, or teaching. And now you've touched upon it there. Can I ask you to share a little bit about, well, the artistry of teaching, and especially
teaching through trauma.
Yeah.
So one of the things that my own personal journey as a mature student, you know, I went to Trent for my master's degree. Trent was small university. It was lots of people who were different ages in my master's program, and I was at the Frost Center for Canadian and Indigenous Studies. So we had elders who came to see us, who gave us seminars, and I was very, very fortunate with the people I got to interact with. We were treated as colleagues. And then I went to Queen's. Now Queen's is different now because Sam McKegney, who writes a lot on Indigenous topics, is there. But Queen's was very white, and this was around the time that also Desmond Cole started writing about his experiences at Queen's, and I did my work in Canadian literature, and the biggest the biggest issue I had as I was writing my exams in Canadian literature was that there were very few Indigenous writers. There were almost no Black writers. There were no, it was almost all white authors. And I thought, and mostly men. And I thought about that, and I got really frustrated. And I thought, when I teach, I'm not going to do that. But one of the things that you have to think about when you're teaching writers, as a white professor in a classroom that may be quite diverse, is that my students have all had different experiences than me. That we're not just teaching stories, we're not just teaching abstract stories, that these have meanings for the students who read them. And they can open up trauma. Mm-hmm. For my Indigenous students in particular, I have students who come into my class, and they won't tell me this, but I know from talking to students further that I have students who are children of 60s scoop survivors who are only just discovering their indigeneity. They're only just discovering their family heritages, their family histories that have been stolen from them. You introduce a story, something as benign seeming as a young adult story like Louise Erdrich's The Birchbark House, which is about a little girl in 1840, a little Anishinaabe girl in 1840. There's all kinds of stuff circling around the edges. There's smallpox. There's forced removal from their lands in northern Minnesota. They have to move further west, and this really happened. The Anishinaabe had to move further and further west onto the prairies. They were forced off their lands. And for some students, this is the first time that they're encountering it. Sometimes it's the first time that they're seeing themselves reflected in the literature. And I have to be really gentle because it can open up all kinds of trauma that they may not be prepared for, that I might not be prepared for. I give a lot of content and trigger warnings. I allow students, if a text becomes too much, I let them, take a step back from it, or even I give them alternate assignments. I had a student in my spring semester who came to me and said, I can't do this particular story. And so I gave them poetry and particularly queer poetry that was really about the body and triumphant. And I said, here, take this and use this. That's part of the artistry of being in the classroom, that you are a fellow learner. And that if you're open to it, you're learning from your students as much, I think more. I feel that way. I'm learning more from my students than they're ever going to remember learning from me. But also, and I have Dan Longboat, who is Haudenosaunee instructor in the Indigenous Studies Department at Trent, who talked to us years and years ago when I was an MA candidate he talked about a talking circle and what the talking circle does. And he put a box in the center of the table. We were all sitting in a circle in the room, as you do in those seminars, right? You sit in a circle. And he said, do you realize that this is important that we're sitting in a circle? And he put a box in it. And then he made us go around the room and describe the box. Well, of course, you can't see everything that's on the box, that it takes the whole circle to make meaning out of the box. The wrong approach to literature, I think, and the biggest turnoff for high school students is that you're taught top down. This is the only meaning of the text. This is what you have to see in the book. Well, everybody comes with this whole different experience. That I'm going to be seeing something like, I don't know, like a Harry Potter story as a newly out gender fluid person who's seen all of J.K. Rowling's problematic tweets and is really upset. I'm going to see Harry Potter very differently now than I saw it 20 years ago, 20 years ago. Oh my God, has it been that long? But I'm going to see it differently than a 20-year-old student in my classroom who is Black and from the Caribbean, right? where are you reflected in that story? And so I really try to allow for multiple interpretations of a text. I focus really, like a hyper focus on proving it. You know, if you've got an idea about something you're seeing, something that's not there that should be there, something that is there, you have to prove it from the story. And it allows for multiple multiple readings, and it makes for a much fuller circle in the end, that everybody sees what they see, and that their ideas are validated, that they learn to figure it out for themselves instead of being told what to see in a book, that sometimes they see things that I've never heard of, or oh my gosh, like there are so many ways to look at stories. And and now I'm getting all excited thinking about this, but really, it's that Renaissance idea that stories make a little universe in your head. You never read one book or one poem by itself. It's always related to what's already in your little universe. So I don't know what students have come in reading. Like when I was young, we read, well, I mean, I was a voracious reader, but also we had no television. I lived in China in the 1970s. There was no television, so we read voraciously. So I have all these kids' books in my head: Enid Blyton, Little Women, Louisa May Alcott. I have all of the, but also books that we don't think about now, like all the Edith Nesbit, the Railway Children, Five Children in It. Like I read all this English children's literature. My students haven't had that. And so it's interesting. Always I'll refer, sometimes assuming that students have read something and then realize, oh yeah, they haven't. Okay, let's think about another way. Let's talk about another, like teaching the Birch Bark House. I had assumed that a lot of students had read the Laura Ingalls, because of course, I grew up with Little House on the Prairie with Pa and Ma, Ingalls, and yeah, they hadn't. So I didn't have a touchstone to say, well, this is why the Birch Bark House is so important, because it speaks back to the racism in Laura Ingalls Wilder. Well, that means nothing to them. So let's find another way to talk about this book.
It reminds me of, I love all of that. And I wish I'd had teachers like yourself who discovered that, because in the Art Hive, part of the principles of the Art Hive are that the resources are in the room with you.
Yeah.
And, if you, sort of decentralizing yourself, I don't know if that's the right way to look at it, but that sense of what happens when I turn it over to the person that I'm with, or if I don't have the answer, or if I don't have the way to communicate a thought, if I, invite someone else into the conversation, or just to open it up to the space.
Yeah.
The community. What do I learn, and how is our experience enriched from that open communication? And when I hear it, like that's for me, like humaning, teaching, holding space, whatever kind of words you want to use to describe it. That's the artistry, the awareness of what you know, what you don't know, what you want to know, being attuned to that curiosity within yourself, and being able to kind of observe it in other people as well, or just those moments when things shift.
Yeah.
Relationships. But it speaks to me too, to like keeping art alive.
Yeah.
Like it makes things relevant. It brings them, like I've never read the Birch Tree, I've never read that.
House. It's on that list that I gave you earlier. So I have 3 copies of it, Mary. I'm going to loan you because I think it's a really good book. You'll cry. And one of my students who's watching this might speak to that, because I gave it to them in Cyclet. But the Birch Bark House, there is a part of it that is really sad, and everybody came into class going, why didn't you warn me about that? But smallpox, that was what smallpox did. And teaching, sometimes teaching those truths is really important, because you don't get it in elementary school, and you don't get it in high school. You don't get it enough. I mean, I was shocked to find out that my sons were doing the same books that I did 40 years ago, almost 40. Oh my God, I'm old. Almost 40 years ago. Like when my oldest son was in grade 9 and they were doing the chrysalids, and I thought, oh my God, I did the chrysalids in 1984. Can we not overhaul this curriculum and make it reflect what our classrooms look like and sound like? I mean, one of the important things to recognize with literature is we get this list of what's great literature rammed down our throats all the time. And as an English major, I can say, yeah, okay, so some of it I do love. I still love Jane Austen. I loathe Dickens, but that's me. But why are they considered great? Who decided that they were the best writers, who decided that Hemingway is the best of the best? Who decided that I don't know, I'm thinking of Philip Roth, or that these, or oh my goodness, think about all those poets from the 60s. Like, who decided that they were so brilliant? It was white men in universities, right? And white women, I think, as well. Although, we have a particular category in literature for women. If you've studied anything pre-1950, it's called the middle brow. And that's literature that isn't elite, but better than like the schlock fiction. Well, why is it that most of that literature is written by women? Because women weren't encouraged to write the great novel. We had to raise kids, and we had to hide our writing underneath, snowsuits and whatever else. And so women weren't encouraged to write that great literature. And if you were experimental, like Virginia Woolf, then you were castigated for it. Or Virginia Woolf was considered not elite enough because she didn't go to a university. Well, why didn't she go to university? Because she was a woman, because her family paid for her brothers to go to university, but not for her. One of my favorite Canadian writers is Laura Goodman Salverson. Why aren't her books reprinted? Why do we get Grove and not Laura Goodman Salverson, whose Confessions of an Immigrant's Daughter talks about backroom abortions in Winnipeg in 1939. And the book's only been republished once. It's so frustrating to me that we're told what literature is supposed to look like, but literature both reflects our world, but it also anticipates a world. When certain people are in charge of deciding, of gatekeeping what's good literature and what isn't good literature, that there's a whole segment of the population who's going to be left off the page. And I think for me, it's restoring that page. I do put Shakespeare on my courses, but I've got a few students I'm seeing here too. Hi guys. I also put a lot of books on my courses that are YA fiction, which is also a category that frustrates me, because I think there's some really great, brilliant stuff.
Oh yeah.
I taught with my first years. We finished the course with The Sun Is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. I cannot say enough good things about that novel, and everybody who reads it also does. It's got so much depth, talking about love from various ways and means, but also talking about what it means to be undocumented, what it means to be an immigrant, what it means to be Black, what it means to be the child of immigrant parents. There's a whole lot of stuff in there about the way we touch each other in a city. The structure of the story is like Ulysses, in that it's one day in New York City, and it follows this young couple around the city and various points of New York City. So it's a love story to New York City too, but also the way we casually touch each other, and how you can have a huge impact on someone, an almost life and death impact, just with one word, just with one kind of one casual gesture. I've thought about that a lot in teaching, and thought about this, the teachers who shut me down, who made me feel small, and I hope I never do that. I hope I never make someone feel insignificant or small, because every student who I've interacted with has something important to say.
Yeah.
You know, I'm getting all excited.
Like this is definitely a part of your creative self-expression, how you engage with people, what you, yeah, it's absolutely.
Humbling. I'll get all teary thinking about it. It's humbling. You know, I've seen students come into my classes who've been really shut down, and then there's just one book or one poem that just opens them up again. And I think it's so important to see yourself reflected. You know, you're paying a lot of money to go to university, but I think it's in high school and elementary school. And if there are any, you know, teachers who are watching this, and your ability to switch someone, to change someone's viewpoint, to make them feel seen, to make them feel that they matter, but also for students who were like me, to also make them feel that they have power to change their world. The second part of my kind of coursework, or how I teach, is always, I think for this generation particularly, my son's generation, is that there's this sense of cynicism. They're super anxious, more anxious than we were, and also more cynical about the world, and they want to change it. And I think they have the means and the power to change it, more than, you know, we let them down. My generation let them down. And so one of my jobs is to empower students to recognize that not only do you have a voice, but you can take action and you can change your world, even in a small, minute way, even if it's in a classroom, even if it's in just an interaction with a person at a grocery store, that you have the power to make the world a better place. Mm-hmm. And that, you know, I was just thinking about this before we signed on. Leslie Marmon Silko is Pueblo, and Leslie Marmon Silko was talking in one of her articles about child rearing in Pueblo culture. And one of the things that she said is that knowledge can't be contained in one generation, that you never reach the sum of all knowledge. And so for me, what we're doing is to teach the next generation to surpass us.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, they already are. I feel left behind a lot in the classroom. I'll give them an idea, they just run with it. And I'm like, oh, that went somewhere I didn't expect. Okay, now I'm busily trying to catch up. Okay, let's go with that. This is interesting.
And that's as it should be, because that's, I mean, how things change. That idea about information, like information, like it's never, the creative information we have, whether it's, you know, or anything we're learning, should never be just as is. It should be questioned. It should be, we should be investigating, you know, that line, like that idea of humble inquiry, you know, like what can we learn? What can we understand? What's the rationale? Like all of these things that you're inviting and encouraging your students to do, I hope and I wish could be encouraged in every environment.
Yeah, me too. I wish that I hadn't been so shut down as a young person, and certainly my cousin is watching this, and she'll nod her head as I say this. I mean, we have a very loving family, and yet really conscious of what other people think. I wish I hadn't been so worried about what other people thought all the time. You know, there's a kind of paralysis that comes from that. And I hope, you know, me being ridiculous in my classroom, and I am pretty ridiculous sometimes. I give them a lot of one-liners, and I have a lot of, as you know, I have a lot of facial gestures, and I tend to be very self-deprecating. That's survival humor, I think, in our family. But I'll make I'll crack jokes. I will make, and they'll laugh, but then they'll get the point of what I'm saying. And yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that. I think one of the things that we have to think about in education is that we're not just dealing with minds, right? That part of my job as a professor is to care for mental health, to care for spiritual health. You know, I have been so fortunate to have the elders that I have come into contact with at Trent and elsewhere who have, you know, imparted their own methods of teaching to me, and the recognition, I think, that as teachers we have to give students the tools to do it for themselves when they're ready to do it for themselves, but also that we aren't just there for their brains, that we're also there to help guide them to their own sense of power, empowerment, to their own sense of self-identity. I can't give it to someone, but I can show them a book that may help them to get there, and we can go through it together. We can talk about it together.
Yeah.
What they take from that book or what they take from my class is theirs. It's not mine. And I think that less centered approach to teaching is how we should be thinking about teaching at every level. You know, that it's not about what I give to you. It's about the tools that I give you to do it for yourself when you're ready.
Yeah.
And it may not be that class. I had a student who just emailed me a couple of weeks ago who was in my class 2 years ago, and they found me on Facebook, and they said, you know, I didn't understand at the time, but I just had this experience with Black Lives Matter, and now I get it.
Wow.
Oh my God, you want to make me cry? You just made me cry. It's not that hard to make me cry, but that was a good cry.
Is that where the activism comes in?
Yeah. Well, and this goes back to Sonia Renee Taylor, because Body is Not an Apology is really, it's on one level, it's a book about fat phobia. And as a fat person, we talk, those of us in the activist community talk about fat in four kind of, and fat is not a bad word, small fat, medium fat, super fat, and finifat. And I've always been a small fat, a tweenie, right? Somewhere between a size 12 and 16, 18 is a tweenie, because you can sort of shop in regular sections. And learning to navigate that world, and our world is so anti-fat and so negative about bodies, and learning to enjoy and appreciate my own body was only ever one level of it. It was so much of body positivity has been kind of hijacked, and the recognition that fat activism or fat liberation is way more than just liking your body, that it's about making sure that people get paid the same, that if you're fat, you get paid less. If you're fat, you don't get treated the same in the medical establishment. And as a small fat, even as a size 14, 16, I got some really heinous doctors who sat and judged me, had no idea what my life was. And I think, yeah, that's a big part of where the activism comes from, is recognizing how much of this activism is built on the backs of Black and brown folks. That how many people work tirelessly as activists because they can't walk away from it, and I can as a white person with privilege. That means I don't rest, because my students in the classroom don't all have it the same. It means constantly questioning myself and my motives, constantly reevaluating how I've approached a text, or how I've approached a student, or how I've approached a relationship with a class. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. It's lovely. It answers the question and it opens up so many other opportunities for
Well,
conversation.
and I was thinking to myself when we were talking about doing this, and you and I had this whole list of things we were going to talk about. Like we're already past 45 minutes, and I'm thinking we could talk for 3 hours, and we do regularly, you know. And I come away both exhausted and excited.
I've chatted with in one of these live streams. It feels like it's the beginning of a series, and maybe I'll every person will just pick up where we left off and keep on, because the conversations we're having are important, and I feel it's about getting to know one another in new ways, sharing this knowledge with other people, and not just this interview, all the chats I've had with all these amazing creators and
Oh,
people
yeah, great
take
one.
the idea of creativity out of a passive context and making it active and dynamic and purposeful, which includes any kind of creation, but also audienceship and
Yeah,
how we receive this information from one another, and recognizing like that when when I'm reading a book, when I'm reading a poem, when I'm listening to a story, I'm listening to something that is alive. I'm listening to someone, right? And it's so easy to forget that sometimes. And I think in a traditional system of education, that's often what happens. It just becomes kind of stuff we do that
yeah.
through us. And what I'm hearing from you today, it's just been so inspiring. And I hope for your other students, they can probably back me up on this. It's just that reminder, no, this is alive. This is living information. This is living. And whether I think what we say about literature can also be applied to all of the other forms of creative self-expression as well.
Great. And you make it alive in taking it in, right? That it
Yeah.
lives in imagination. You know, like I'm thinking about a Picasso painting, a girl with guitar with her head. You know, I made a story about her in my head when I think the first time I saw that painting, I must have been about 9 or 10. And it was just such a sad painting. It was so sad and so dark. And I made this whole story up in my head. You know, art, stories, narratives, they 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 live inside us. Like I said, in this universe, in our hearts, in our spirit, in our mind. You'll turn back to certain books again when times get bad. I know I do.
Yeah.
You have certain things that you turn to when you're sad or you're lonely or you're hungry. Or you're feeling anxious, and there are things that kind of settle you down. You know, I don't understand why murder mysteries always make me feel so calm.
I don't either.
Of murder, but they do. There's something repetitive in them that makes, you know, I read the Thomas King's Thump's Dreadful Water series, and I think there are 5 books in the series, and I read them again just recently because they're just so satisfying. It's kind of like this hard-boiled slash procedural detective drama. Really, how is that comforting, right? There's a serial killer on the loose. How is that comforting? But it is.
I don't know. I do not know either. Well, maybe we'll make that a whole other conversation.
Yeah, sorry, I got sidetracked about books again. And I do get excited talking about books. I mean, and I think maybe that's something should be carried into the classroom too, is just a sense of enthusiasm and excitement.
Yeah.
But also recognizing that you do have to navigate the road of you know, trauma, of pain that books can open up. Once you get through that, once you address that pain, it can actually help. I find some books really healing that way. I think it's one of the reasons why books become like friends to me. I feel the characters, they come alive in my head, and really you need readers to make that happen. So yeah, they are alive, but you make them alive.
Yeah, and that's that lovely engagement of why. Yeah. Oh, there's only a few minutes left, so we'll put a pin in this right now, and we'll come back to it.
knowing you and me will like on our own, we'll have like various digressions, and then we'll come back with, like more digressions into other stuff. But you know what? For teachers, if anybody is, is looking for ideas or references or books, hit me up. I'm happy to help. I have cupboards full of ideas in my head and my actual cupboards. So yeah, lots of resources out there on teaching, particularly I think in this era, teaching Indigenous literatures really, and Black literatures, but it really matters. It's really important. To tell the real stories about Canada and about Canadian culture, but also to tell the stories of the people who are sitting in your classroom. We ourselves. We need to see ourselves reflected.
And maybe this will be for the next conversation as well, but making space for those teachers who can speak from that lived experience as well to, as we move forward. That's
an important thing too, is making the next generation of, I don't want to be looking at an English department that's all white anymore. That I am trying actively to get, grad students, students into grad school and take my job, please take my job, and let's make it permanent so that you actually have a place. The academy's got to change, but that's a subject for another day.
Another day, changing the academy. Emily, thank you for joining today. Always a pleasure to chat with you.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to chat with you too. It's nice to look at your face. This is great. Thank you.
Well, all right.
All right.
Bye for now.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. Emily, thank you for being a part of this conversation today, our live stream chat. It is an amazing thing to recognize the interactions we have with one another are creative and empowering, and that we are allowed to question. Whether you're a student in a classroom or a student of life, we can question, we can be curious, and we can do our best to move these conversations forward and open them up so that we can just have more enjoyable experiences with everything around us. That's that system of oppression that tells us there's only one way and one thing and one reason. It kind of denies us joy, folks. And if you've been in the art hive, well, I've been ranting about that kind of stuff, these are some of the reasons why. So again, thank you so much to Emily joining. Thank you for joining and hanging in there. If you have any questions for Emily, let me know and I can connect you. And just a note, next Tuesday, we'll be interviewing filmmaker Rebecca Ortiz, who will be is a young up-and-coming Canadian filmmaker doing amazing stuff as a part of her production company, Sugar Glass Films. Come on back next Tuesday and tune in for that live stream chat as well. But in the meantime, thank you everyone for watching. You're amazing. I look forward to seeing you again soon. And until we can connect and create with one another again in person, I look forward to connecting and creating with you here online. Bye, folks.